I remember the exact moment I decided who I would become. Not the name that would echo through arenas or the trophies that would line my shelves, but the essence beneath it all. I was 13, lying on me bed in Italy, a basketball clutched to my chest like a lifeline. Rain tapped against the window. Italian voices drifted from the street below. In that quiet moment, something crystallized inside me. A certain tie so profound it felt like destiny revealing itself. Most people think my story started with the Lakers, with that 17-year-old kid who skipped college. But the cameras only capture what happens in the light. The real story began in the shadows, in moments no one witnessed. That night in Italy, I whispered a promise into the darkness. I will not be outworked. Not today. Not ever. The words hung in the air, not just a declaration, but an incantation, a spell that would shape everything that followed. People always ask about talent. They want the easy answer, the genetic lottery explanation. But talent just the entry fee. What happens after that? That's written in sweat, in blood, in the choices you make when the gym lights are off and everyone else has gone home. My father, Joe Jellybean Bryant, had given me my first basketball when I was 3. I can still feel it, the leather too rough for my small hands, the weight that seemed impossible to control, yet somehow feeling like an extension of myself. He had played in the NBA before taking our family to Italy when I was 6. I watched him play with a focus that unnerved adults around me, not just studying the highlight moments, but the subtleties, the footwork, the shoulder fake that created half an inch of space, the eyes that saw the court as a chessboard while others saw only chaos. Basketball is like a language, he told me once after I'd stormed away from practice in frustration. You can learn to speak it, or you can learn to write poetry with it. I wanted to write poetry that would bring tears to the eyes of gods. In those Italian years, I was always the outsider. The American kid who couldn't speak the language, with strange clothes and stranger habits. Basketball became more than my passion. It was my voice, my identity, my redemption. While the transition tore at me, new country, new language, new everything, the court remained constant. The rim stood at the same height. The rules never changed. There was salvation in that consistency. I'd spend hours at the playground near our apartment in Rieti. The same moves, over and over. Crossover, pull up, release. Again, again. Italian kids would gather, some watching in fascination, others mocking the obsessive American boy. I heard their laughter, but filtered it into white noise. The sun would set, shadows stretching across the court, and still I'd be there, the rhythmic bounce of the ball keeping time like a heartbeat. What they didn't understand, what most people never grasp, is that repetition isn't boring when you're obsessed with perfection. Each shot contained a universe of minute adjustments. I wasn't just shooting 1,000 times. I was solving 1,000 different problems, having 1,000 conversations with myself about angle, spin, release point, the tension in my fingertips. My heroes in those days? Michael Jordan, of course. I'd rewind VHS tapes until they wore thin, studying his movements frame by frame, like a scientist decoding the human genome. I wasn't just watching basketball. I was conducting research. By the time we returned to the United States when I was 13, I had already mapped out my future with mathematical precision. Not just making it to the NBA, that was a given in my adolescent certainty, but the exact player I would become. Complete. Unstoppable. Immortal. Lower Marion High School in a Philadelphia suburb became my laboratory. While other talented players relied on their natural gifts, I approached each practice like an engineer, deconstructing every component of the game. My coaches were initially uncomfortable with my questions. Why would a teenager need to understand the biomechanics of a crossover or the geometric principles of the triangle offense? Most kids your age just want to know how to dunk, Coach Downer told me after I'd interrogated him about defensive rotations. I met his eyes with an intensity that made him shift his weight. I'm not most kids. The hunger that drove me created an invisible barrier between myself and others. Teammates found my intensity alienating. Why practice for 3 hours after school when we'd already won by 20? Why review game tape on weekend nights when parties beckoned? Why shoot free throws until your fingers bled? They couldn't see what I saw. That greatness isn't accidental. It's mathematical. Every hour invested compounds with interest, paying dividends in those split-second moments that separate champions from contenders. When people later called certain shots lucky, I would smile with the private knowledge that luck is just preparation meeting opportunity. And I had prepared for everything. My routine at Lower Merion bordered on manic. Pre-dawn shooting sessions in the gym, the janitor silently unlocking the door without question after the first week. School days where basketball diagrams filled the margins of my notebooks. Evenings at home where the neighbors grew accustomed to the rhythmic bouncing until midnight, the porch light casting my elongated shadow across the driveway as I worked on yet another variation of a fadeaway. The physical toll was substantial. Growing pains magnified by the stress I put on my young body led touches that would have sidelined others. But I processed pain differently, not as a warning but as information. Pain wasn't telling me to stop. It was highlighting what needed strengthening. I began to understand my body as an instrument, one that required both relentless pushing and scientific maintenance. You're obsessed, a girlfriend told me junior year, her voice carrying equal parts admiration and concern. Thank you, I replied, completely sincere. The word contained everything I aspired to be. By senior year, the results were undeniable. I led Lower Merion to the state championship. College scouts overflowed the stands. Local papers covered my games with a reverence usually reserved for professionals. The whispers grew louder. This kid might skip college entirely. The idea didn't frighten me. In my mind, I've been preparing for the NBA since I was 6. College seemed like an unnecessary detour. But making such a leap required absolute certainty, not just in my abilities, but in my readiness for a world that would try to break me in ways I couldn't fully anticipate. Through connections my father maintained, I arranged a phone call with Michael Jordan himself. The conversation lasted barely 3 minutes, but branded itself into my memory. "Are you ready to sacrifice everything?" he asked, his voice deeper than I expected. "Not fame, not money, everything. I already have been," I answered, trying to keep my voice from betraying the awe I felt speaking to my doll. A long silence stretched between us. I feared I'd sounded arrogant, disrespectful. "We'll see," he said finally. Not an endorsement, but a challenge. 3 syllables that would echo in my mind through countless pre-dawn workouts in the years to come. The 1996 NBA draft approached with growing speculation. I worked out for several teams, approaching each session with methodical intensity. Some executives were visibly impressed. Others couldn't hide their skepticism, not of my talent, but of my maturity. Could a 17-year-old handle the pressure-soft professional basketball, the lifestyle, the expectations? What they didn't understand was that I didn't want a typical NBA lifestyle. I wanted basketball, distilled to its purest form. The game wasn't my route to something else. It was the destination itself. The Charlotte Hornets selected me with the 13th pick, but I already knew I wouldn't play there. A trade had been arranged to send me to the Lakers, the team I'd dreamed of since watching Magic Johnson as a child. Los Angeles. The City of Stars would now have a new one, though few suspected just how brightly I intended to burn. My first summer as a Laker, before I'd even played an official game, established the pattern that would define my career. While other rookies enjoyed their first professional paychecks, I was at the Lakers facility before the sun rose and left long after it set. The security guards adjusted their schedules around mine, knowing I'd be wanting access when no one else would consider working. "Kid, do you ever sleep?" One of them asked me after letting me in at 4:30 a.m. I looked at him with genuine confusion. "I'll sleep when I've won championships." Those early mornings became sacred to me. The empty court, the sound of the ball against hardwood echoing in the vacant arena, the squeak of my shoes the only human sound for hours. These were moments of pure communion with the game. No distractions, no expectations except those I placed upon myself. I would visualize specific game situations, talking myself through each decision. Down by 2, 8 seconds left, ball at the top of the key, best defender in the league guarding you. What's your move? Then I would execute, not once but dozens of times, varying the approach, solving the problem from every angle. In my mind, these weren't drills. They were rehearsals for moments that destiny would eventually provide. The veterans on the team didn't quite know what to make of me at first. Shaquille O'Neal, our superstar center who had signed as a free agent that same summer, initially viewed my intensity with a mixture of amusement and confusion. "Young fella thinks he's going to outwork everybody," he commented to another player, loud enough for me to hear. I didn't respond. Actions would speak for me. My first professional season brought expected challenges. The game was faster, the players stronger and more skilled than any I'd faced. Coaches limited my minutes, concerned about overextending a young player still growing into his body. The media alternated between hyping my potential and criticizing Mishit selection. Fans were similarly divided, some embracing the excitement of my youth, while others questioned whether I truly belonged. Through it all, my routine never wavered. If anything, the doubts only intensified my resolve. A poor shooting night meant 2 additional hours of shots the next morning. A defensive lapse meant studying film until I could identify the exact moment of breakdown and how to prevent it in the future. Then came the moment that would define me in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The Utah series in the 1997 playoffs. Game 5, elimination on the line. The Lakers trailing late, the ball in my hands as the clock wound down. I took the shot. Air ball. I took another. Air ball. Again and again. 4 air balls in the final minutes and overtime. We lost. The headlines were merciless. Choke artist. Lakers rookie crumbles. Too much, too soon. Sports radio eviscerated me. Former players questioned my decision-making, my maturity, my place in the league. The criticism was an avalanche, burying any notion that I belonged among the elite. That night, in a Salt Lake City hotel room, I sat in the dark for hours. The silence, so complete I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. My teammates avoided me, unsure what to say to the teenager who had just imploded on national television. I felt their absence like a physical weight. Contrary to what everyone believed, I wasn't devastated. I was transforming. Those air balls weren't failures. They were the most valuable information I'd ever received. My legs had given out in the critical moments. My conditioning, which I had believed exceptional, was insufficient. The revelation was painful but perfect in its clarity. The next day, upon returning to Los Angeles, I went straight from the airport to a local gym. While teammates scattered for the off-season, some to vacations, others to rest injuries, I began a new chapter in my evolution. I redesigned my entire training program with a singular focus: I would never bait a player who faltered when fatigue set in. I would be the one who thrived when everyone else was exhausted. That summer established what would later be recognized as an element of the Mamba mentality, though I hadn't yet embraced the nickname. The concept was simple: transform weaknesses into strengths, and strengths into weapons. The process was brutal. It meant destroying my body daily, pushing past reasonable limits, reprogramming my mind to interpret pain as progress. I established a routine that bordered on pathological. Up at 3:30 a.m., workout from 4 to 6 o'clock, rest, then basketball skills from 9 to 11 o'clock, weights and conditioning in the afternoon, evening shooting sessions. Repeat, day after day after day. You're going to break down, a trainer warned me, genuine concern in his eyes as he watched me struggle through a set of weighted ankle exercises. I'm building up. I corrected him, each word pushed through gritted teeth. There's a difference. I studied anatomy, biomechanics, and exercise physiology like a medical student preparing for boards. I didn't just work hard. I worked precisely, scientifically, obsessively. I learned which exercises targeted specific muscle groups that would enhance particular basketball movements. I researched nutrition before it was common for athletes. I practiced meditation not for enlightenment, but for performance. The ability to maintain focus when arena lights were brightest and pressure highest. When the next season began, teammates noticed the difference immediately. I wasn't just quicker or stronger. I was relentless in a way that made others uncomfortable. Practices became psychological warfare. I would target the team's best defender, not just to score, but to break them mentally. I wanted them to feel that no matter how well they played, I would never stop coming. Ease up, a veteran told me after I'd spent a practice session mercilessly attacking his defensive weaknesses. Save something for the actual games. I looked at him as if he'd suggested I start shooting left-handed. This is the game. My second season showed promise, but also continued frustration. I made the All-Star team as a starter, a statement of my growing popularity more than my complete development as a player. We made the playoffs again, but fell short of championship contention. I was improving, but the team's ceiling seemed limited by both its composition and its collective mentality. The summer of 1998 became another reconstruction period. While I maintained the physical regimen established the previous year, I added a new dimension to my preparation: skill acquisition. I sought out experts in specific basketball movements, footwork specialists, shooting coaches, defensive tacticians. I wasn't too proud to become a student again, regardless of my rising profile. As my third season approached, a significant change altered the team's dynamics. Phil Jackson was hired as head coach, bringing with him the triangle offense that had helped Jordan's Bulls dominate the league. That Jackson's approach was unlike any coach I'd experienced. Part basketball tactician, part psychological guide, part Zen philosopher. Our first meeting set the tone for what would become a complex relationship that would transform us both. "I've watched film of every game you've played," he told me, his eyes assessing me with unnerving calm. "You have tremendous talent, but talent alone won't fulfill your potential." I waited for the typical coach speech about teamwork, about passing more, about fitting into a system. Instead, he surprised me. "You need to harness the darkness and the light within you. Balance them. Right now, you're all fire. Fire consumes everything, including itself." The shift wasn't easy. There were frustrating practices where I chafed against the constraints of the system. There were tense film sessions where Jackson would pointedly highlight moments where mid-decisions had broken the offense's flow. There were games where I struggled to balance my scoring instincts with the team's broader needs. But gradually, something transformed. I began to see basketball differently. not as a series of one-on-one confrontations, but as a complex, interconnected system where force applied in one area created opportunities in another. The triangle offense wasn't limiting my effectiveness. It was expanding it, providing a structure that actually amplified individual brilliance by embedding it within a coherent whole. As this understanding deepened, my relationship with Shaquille O'Neal evolved as well. Our skills complemented each other perfectly. His unstoppable interior presence, my perimeter versatility. When we aligned our competitive drives, we became nearly unbeatable. The 1999 to 2000 season saw everything coalesce. Jackson's system, Shaq's dominance, my evolving game, and a supporting cast that fulfilled their roles with precision. We steamrolled through the regular season, then faced increasing resistance in the playoffs. Each series presented new challenges, new puzzles to solve. Against Sacramento, against Phoenix, against Portland in a conference finals that tested every aspect of our team's character, especially in a Game 7 where we overcame a 15-point fourth-quarter deficit. Then the finals against Indiana. The moment I had prepared for since those solitary sessions on Italian playgrounds was finally at hand. A championship within reach. Game 2 became another defining moment in my journey, though not in the way I had envisioned. During the first quarter, Jalen Rose slid his foot under me as I landed from a jump shot. My ankle twisted with a sickening pop. Pain shot up my leg like electrical current, so intense that for a moment the arena lights seemed to dim. I limped to the locker room, the crowd's murmur following me like a wave. The team doctor examined me, his face grim. Severe sprain. You're done for the night, maybe longer. I looked at him as if he'd spoken a language I didn't understand. Tape it up. Kobe, this isn't about toughness. You physically can't. Tape it up. He hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. As he wrapped the ankle, I closed my eyes and began the mental process I'd practiced for situations exactly like this. Pain, compartmentalization, focus narrowing. The injury wasn't gone, but it was now separate from me, a fact to be acknowledged but not permitted to interfere. I returned to the game, moving with a controlled precision that masked the agony firing through my nervous system with each step. I contributed where I could, but our offense now ran primarily through Shaq, who was dominating the paint with a force that seemed unstoppable, until he wasn't. In overtime, Shaq fouled out, leaving the court with a mix of frustration and resignation. Coach Jackson looked at me during the timeout. No instructions needed. The message was clear. This is your time. Jalen Rose was guarding me, the same defender whose foot had caused my injury. The pain in my ankle had evolved from sharp to throbbing, each heartbeat sending a fresh wave of discomfort. But in that moment, something strange happened. The pain didn't diminish, it clarified. Every sensation became sharper, every thought more focused. This wasn't just another game situation. This was the culmination of fevery 4 a.m. workout. Every solitary training session, every choice I'd made that separated me from my peers. The play developed as if in slow motion. The screen came. The switch happened. The space appeared. Elevated, the damaged ankle screaming in protest, suspended in air as defenders converged. The shot left me fingers with perfect rotation, reaching its apex before descending through the net with a sound that seemed to silence the roaring crowd for one perfect heartbeat. As teammates mobbed me, as the arena erupted, I felt a strange detachment. This wasn't exhilaration or relief. It was verification. The shot wasn't lucky or miraculous. It was inevitable. The mathematical result of all those hours, all those repetitions, all those choices made when no one was watching. We won the championship, the first of what I intended to be many. Standing on the court as gold confetti rained down, the Larry O'Brien trophy gleaming under the arena lights. I permitted myself a moment of satisfaction. Not completion. I was far from finished, but acknowledgement that the path I had chosen, the one that had often left me isolated and misunderstood, was vindicated. Later that night, alone in my hotel room with the championship hat still on my head, I gazed out at the Indianapolis skyline. The city lights blurred through the window, my body finally acknowledging the toll the playoffs had taken. The ankle throbbed with each heartbeat, but the pain felt almost ceremonial, the price paid for the achievement. I thought about the journey that had led here. The solitary kid on Italian courts. The teenager obsessed with perfection. The young pro absorbing criticism while rebuilding himself from the ground up. Fear balls in Utah that had broken me down so I could reconstruct myself stronger. Each version necessarito produced the champion, now sitting in the darkness, already thinking about the next season, the next challenge, the next level of excellence to attain. The Mamba Mentality was taking shape, though the nickname still lay in the future. It wasn't just about work ethic, though that remained its foundation. It was a comprehensive approach to existence, setting standards beyond what seems reasonable, then constructing daily practices that inexorably move you toward those standards. It was about seeking greatness not as an outcome, but as a continuous process, one that never reached completion because perfection always remained one more repetition away. As I drifted towards sleep, championship secured but hunger undiminished. One thought crystallized with perfect clarity. This was just the beginning. I hadn't reached the summit. I had merely established base camp. The true ascent still lay ahead. What no one else could see, what perhaps even I didn't fully comprehend yet, was that winning had changed nothing and everything simultaneously. The validation hadn't satisfied my hunger. It had intensified it. And in that intensity lay both the greatness that would define my career and the seeds off conflict that would nearly destroy it. The media celebrated our championship as the beginning of a dynasty. They were right, but not in the way they imagined. The journey ahead would be darker, more complex, and more painful than anyone could predict. The partnership with Shaq that seemed so perfect would fracture under the weight of our competing egos. The public adoration would transform into scrutiny and judgment. The basketball world that now celebrated me would soon question everything: my character, my leadership, my very identity. But that night, as sleep finally claimed me, I smiled. Because I knew something they didn't. I was built for the storm that was coming. I had been preparing for it my entire life. The Mamba was just beginning to show his fangs, and the world had no idea what was coming next. The morning after winning my first championship, I stood in front of the mirror, examining the swollen mass that had replaced my right ankle. Purple and distended, it pulsed with each heartbeat. The team doctors had advised weeks of complete rest. I laced up my shoes anyway, each movement sending lightning bolts of pain up my leg. There's a fundamental misconception about success, that it changes you, that achievement somehow transforms hunger into satisfaction. The morning after reaching what most consider a career pinnacle, it wasn't basking in glory. I was already haunted by its impermanence. That first championship didn't feel like an arrival. It felt like permission to push harder, demand more, reach further than what conventional wisdom deemed reasonable. The trophy wasn't a finish line. It was validation that everything I believed about excellence was true. And if it was true, then there was so much further to go. When the 2000 to 2001 season began, a subtle but unmistakable shift had occurred in the Lakers' dynamics that I returned leaner, faster, more precise, the result of another summer of monastic dedication. Shaq returned different, still dominant when engaged, still the most physically overwhelming force in basketball, but carrying extra weight both literally and in his growing celebrity status. His focus had begun to split between basketball and the expanding universe of opportunities his fame provided. Our first practice revealed the first hairline fracture in what the media had dubbed a perfect partnership. The team was running defensive rotations, and Shaq was consistently late to his position, leaving the rim unprotected. "You need to be there," I said, pointing to the empty space he should have filled. He gave me a look that would have silenced most teammates. "We got the ring, young fella. Relax. We got one," I replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I want 5. A flash of something crossed his face. Annoyance, perhaps, or surprise at being challenged. He said nothing, but the temperature in the gym had changed. Phil Jackson observed the exchange from the sideline, his expression unreadable, but his eyes missing nothing. What the public couldn't see was the fundamental philosophical divide forming between us. To Shaq, basketball was his job, his platform, but not his obsession. He believed in managing his energy, in the concept of a regular season being distinct from playoff intensity. It wasn't laziness, as some later suggested. It was a calculated approach from a player who understood his physical limitations. My philosophy was the antithesis of this. Every practice was Game 7. Every drill was performed at maximum intensity. Every minute on the court was an opportunity that couldn't be wasted. There was no switch, no conservation mode. This wasn't just about basketball. It was about existence itself. The 2000 to 2001 Lakers became a juggernaut despite these undercurrents. Or perhaps because of them, we channeled the tension into a devastating on-court product. We swept through the regular season with the confidence of champions, and when the playoffs arrived, we elevated to a level few teams in history have reached. We went 15-1 in the postseason, a nearly perfect run to our second consecutive championship. The lone loss came in Game 1 of the finals against Philadelphia, where Allen Iverson, another player whose intensity one respected deeply, put on a performance for the ages. After that loss, I approached practice with a coldness that unnerved even veterans on the team. I didn't speak. I didn't smile. I moved through drills with mechanical precision, eyes fixed on some point beyond the present. We won the next 4 games. Back-to-back championships. Standing on the court in Philadelphia as Ware received the trophy, I caught a glimpse of Shaq soaking in the moment, relishing the adulation. I felt nothing but impatience. The job wasn't finished. That summer, the divide between us widened. While I maintained my relentless training regimen, Shaq pursued entertainment opportunities and business ventures. I couldn't comprehend it. How could anything compete with the pursuit of greatness on the court? When he arrived at training camp before the 2001 to 2002 season, visibly out of shape, something hardened inside me. This wasn't just a philosophical difference anymore. It felt like a personal affront. "I'll get in shape during the season," he said when I confronted him. "I always do." "That's not how this works," I replied. "Championship habits aren't built in April. They're built right now." He laughed, but there was an edge to it. "Got 2 rings doing it my way." "Could have been better," I said. "Could have been perfect." His expression darkened. "Not everything's about perfection. Some of us are human." The implication stung more than he knew. The perception that I was some basketball-obsessed machine, devoid of normal emotions, had followed me since high school. It wasn't true, but I'd stopped trying to correct it. Let them think what they wanted. The results would speak. Despite these growing fractures, our talent and Phil Jackson's system prevailed. We secured a 3rd consecutive championship in 2002, cementing our place in NBA history. The three-peat should have been a unifying achievement. Instead, it seemed to accelerate the divergence of our paths. The summer of 2002 brought my first significant physical setback. During a pickup game, I felt something tear in my right shoulder, a labrum injury requiring surgery and months of rehabilitation. For the first time, my body had betrayed me in a meaningful way. This limitation was maddening, like running underwater. But it also provided an unexpected window. It watched film obsessively, not just of current players, but of legends from different eras. Oscar Robertson, Jerry West, Pete Maravich. I studied their movements, their decision-making, looking for elements I could incorporate once I returned. The recovery process also revealed something about Shaq that complicated my feelings toward him. Despite our growing professional friction, he showed genuine personal concern. He checked on my progress regularly, offered encouragement, demonstrated a humanity that cut through our differences. These moments confused me. How could someone care about me personally while simultaneously undermining what I valued professionally? I returned midway through the 2002 to 2003 season, my body healed, but my mind restless. During my absence, the Lakers had struggled with consistency. We remained formidable, but the aura of invincibility had diminished. Other Western Conference teams, particularly the Spurs and Kings, had improved specifically to challenge us. The tension between Shaq and me resurfaced with new intensity. A game against the Rockets in February 2003 brought it to a head. During a timeout, I criticized his defensive effort. If you get back on defense instead of complaining about not getting the ball, maybe they wouldn't have scored, I said. The huddle went silent. This wasn't our usual back and forth. This was public, in front of teammates and coaches. Maybe if you'd pass the damn ball, we wouldn't have to worry about defense, he fired back. Phil intervened, but the damage was done. The private conflict had become public, and once released, it couldn't be contained. Reporters began asking direct questions about our relationship. Teammates were forced to take sides or awkwardly avoid doing so. The media simplified everything. Kobe the selfish gunner versus Shaq the lazy big man. Both characterizations were unfair, but we each played into them at times. I became more isolated, more defiant. He became more vocal about shot distribution, more pointed in his criticisms. Our playoff run that year ended in the Western Conference semifinals against the Spurs. The defeat was humiliating, not just the result, but how it happened. We looked disjointed, disconnected. The triangle offense that had been our framework for success now seemed fragmented, with possessions devolving Ginto, either force-feeding Shaq in the post, or me trying to create an isolation. That summer, I retreated deeper into my training, but with a new edge of defiance. I wasn't just preparing for the next season. I was preparing for my eventual independence. I worked on elements of my game that would make me less reliant on having a dominant center. Footwork that created separation without screens, three-point range that would stretch defenses, defensive techniques that would allow me to guard multiple positions. The 2003 to 2004 season began with the Lakers adding Karl Malone and Gary Payton, future Hall of Famers seeking the championships that had eluded them. On paper, we were perhaps the most talented team ever assembled. In reality, we were a collection of competing agendas barely contained within a single uniform. Then came Colorado. In July 2003, I was arrested on sexual assault charges following an incident at a hotel. The criminal case would eventually be dismissed, but the impact was immediate and devastating. I remember the moment I first saw my mugshot on television. I was sitting alone in my living room, the house empty except for me. My wife had taken our daughter and left. The image on the screen, me in an orange jumpsuit, hollow-eyed, shell-shocked, didn't look like me. Couldn't be me, but it was. The public reaction was swift and merciless. Sponsors dropped me overnight. McDonald's, Nutella, Spalding. Contracts worth millions vanished with single-paragraph press releases expressing disappointment and concern. Fans who had worn my jersey burn them in parking lots. Arena chants transformed from adulation to vicious taunts. No means no echoed through visiting stadiums. Signs with crude slogans appeared in crowds. People I considered friends suddenly couldn't be reached. The presumption of innocence, a cornerstone of the justice system, seemed not to apply in the court of public opinion. I had become toxic, a liability, a pariah, a cautionary tale. The isolation was absolute and disorienting. For someone who had lived in the public eye since 17, the sudden withdrawal of all that validation created a vacuum that threatened to collapse me entirely. Basketball had always been my sanctuary, the place where external chaos faded into background noise. Now, even that sanctuary felt contaminated. Every move on the court was analyzed not just for its basketball merit, but as some reflection of my character, my guilt, or innocence. Nights became the enemy. Sleep was fleeting, interrupted by panic that would send me gasping upright in darkness. The legal process crawled forward with excruciating slowness, while my reputation disintegrated in real time. Court appearances, attorney meetings, depositions, each one another opportunity for media scrutiny, another day of seeing my name in headlines next to words I could never have imagined. The team's response was complicated. Some teammates offered private support while maintaining public neutrality. Others used the situation to advance their own narratives about my character. Shaq, surprisingly, was among the more supportive, though our professional relationship remained strained. "This game can be taken from you," he told me after practice, one of the few times we spoke about anything beyond basketball that season. Remember that. It was the kind of perspective I would have dismissed as weakness before. Now, it resonated with painful clarity. The 2003 to 2004 season became a surreal experience, playing elite basketball while my personal life and reputation unraveled. Each road game brought hostile crowds with signs, chants, and constant reminders off the case. Each home game carried the weight of proving myself worthy of support despite the allegations. I developed a psychological mechanism that would later evolve into the Black Mamba persona, a separation of self. The person enduring the legal process, the public hatred, the disintegration of his family. That was Kobe Bryant, a man overwhelmed by circumstances he never anticipated. But for those 48 minutes on the court, I could become someone else. Someone untouchable. Someone without fear or vulnerability. Someone who channeled isolation and hatred into fuel. Despite these unprecedented pressures, we advanced to the NBA Finals, facing the Detroit Pistons. The series exposed every crack in our foundation. Detroit's team-oriented approach contrasted sharply with our disjointed stars. They were connected. We were fragmented. They trusted each other. We harbored suspicions. The result was a humiliating defeat, the Pistons dismantling us in 5 games. The loss marked the end of an era. Phil Jackson departed. Shaq demanded a trade and was sent to Miami. The team that had dominated the early 2000s was dismantled, leaving me as both the last man standing and the scapegoat for its dissolution. That summer, I sat alone in an empty gym at 4 a.m., the only sound the rhythmic bouncing of the ball against hardwood. The dynasty was over. My reputation was in tatters. My marriage was damaged, perhaps irreparably. Former teammates were giving interviews that painted me as the villain. Fans who had once chanted my name now booed my introduction. I was 25 years old and already viewed as a cautionary tale rather than an ongoing story. In that moment of absolute isolation, something crystallized within me. If isolation was my reality, I would transform it into my advantage. If villainy was my assigned role, I would embrace it fully. If the Lakers were now my team, I would redefine what that meant according to my own uncompromising standards. The Kobe who had entered the league as a teenage phenom with boundless enthusiasm was gone. In his place emerged something harder, darker, more focused. The criticism that once stung now fueled me. The isolation that once felt imposed now felt chosen. During this period of reconstruction, I encountered a documentary about black mambas, deadly African snakes known for their speed, aggression, and precision. Something about these creatures resonated with him. They didn't hunt in packs. They didn't rely on size or strength. They struck with lethal accuracy, without hesitation or mercy. The Black Mamba wasn't just a nickname. It was psychological armor, a separate identity I could step into when the weight of being Kobe Bryant became too heavy to bear. When the booze rained down, when the chants became vicious, when the isolation felt suffocating, that wasn't directed at me. It was directed at a character I played, a persona I could put on and take off. The 2004 to 2005 season began with diminished expectations. Without Shaq, without Phil, with a roster off-role players and cast-offs, the Lakers were predicted to miss the playoffs entirely. I approached this challenge with a ferocity that alarmed even those who thought they knew me. My practice intensity increased beyond what most considered reasonable. My demands of teammates became legendary, and not always in a positive way. I remember a practice early that season. We were running a basic offensive set, and a young player missed a rotation, resulting in a turnover. The coaches were ready to move on. I wasn't. "Run it again," I said. The coaches exchanged glances but complied. Same result. Again. Third attempt. Another mistake. "Everyone except him." I pointed to the young player. "Line up on the baseline. Sprints until he gets it right." The gym went silent. This wasn't normal leadership behavior. This wasn't how teams typically functioned. But nothing about this situation was typical. The team ran. The player eventually executed correctly. The message was delivered. Mediocrity would not be tolerated, regardless of circumstance. My approach alienated some teammates. Terms like difficult, demanding, and obsessive followed like shadows. Few understood that this wasn't about basketball anymore. This was about identity, about redefining what was possible when everything familiar had been stripped away. Despite individual statistical brilliance, including an 81-point game against Toronto in January 2006, we missed the playoffs that season. For the first time since my rookie year, I watched the postseason from home. The 81-point game deserves its own reflection. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even anticipated. We were down 18 points to a mediocre Raptors team, and something just ignited. Each basket seemed to create space for the next. Time slowed. The rim expanded. Defenders became ghosts, visible but unable to affect my trajectory. In the third quarter, I scored 27 points. In the fourth, 28 more. The crowd's energy transformed from standard cheering to something more primal, a collective recognition that they were witnessing something historic. When the final buzzer sounded, the scoreboard showed 81 points, the second highest individual scoring performance in NBA history. In a locker room afterward, reporters crowded around, asking how it felt, what I was thinking, whether I'd been aware of the record. I gave answers, but they weren't the truth. The truth was too complex, too personal to share. Those 81 points weren't about basketball excellence. They were about exorcism. For 3 hours, the Black Mamba had taken complete control, had silenced every doubt, every criticism, every chant and sign and headline. For 3 hours, nothing existed except the ball, the rim, and the space between them. The sensation wasn't joy. It was relief, a temporary respite from the weight of being Kobe Bryant. That performance became emblematic of this period. Individual brilliance amidst collective struggle. Critics pointed to games like this as evidence of selfishness, of placing personal achievement above team success. They missed the larger context. Without Shaq, without Phil, with a roster of role players, individual brilliance was the only path available. Phil Jackson's return for the 2005 to 2006 season provided an unexpected opportunity for growth. Our relationship had always been complex, but his absence had given me new appreciation for his psychological insight. During our first meeting after his return, I expected tension, perhaps recrimination for my role in the team's disintegration. Instead, he presented me with a book, Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. No explanation, no discussion of the past, just a simple gesture that acknowledged a new chapter was beginning. "I've been watching," he said after I accepted the book. "You've been trying to carry everything alone, that's not sustainable." "I don't have a choice," I replied. You always have a choice, he countered. The question is whether you're brave enough to make a different one. The conversation lingered with me, challenging assumptions I had calcified into certainties. What if isolation wasn't strength but limitation? What if leadership meant more than demanding excellence, but inspiring it? These questions didn't transform me overnight. The Mamba was too deeply ingrained, too necessary for survival in a league that had become increasingly hostile territory. But seeds were planted that would eventually grow into a more nuanced understanding of what greatness required. The transformation accelerated with the acquisition of Pau Gasol in February 2008. For the first time since Shaq's departure, I had a teammate whose basketball IQ matched my own, whose skill set complemented rather than duplicated mine, whose work ethic earned my respect without reservation. Our connection was immediate and profound, though entirely different from my dynamic with Shaq. Where that relationship had been combustible, competitive, often antagonistic, this one was cerebral, complementary, based on mutual recognition of complementary strengths. I remember our first practice together. After running through basic sets to familiarize him with the system, we stayed late to work on two-man actions. Within minutes, it became clear this wasn't just another talented player. This was someone who processed the game with the same seriousness, the same attention to detail that I did. You see it before it happens, I said to him after he made a perfect read on a defensive rotation. Basketball is mathematics, he replied with a shrug. Angles, timing, distance. It's all calculable. I smiled, perhaps the first genuine smile in a practice setting in years. He spoke my language. The remainder of that season showed glimpses of what was possible with this new partnership. We're at the NBA Finals, facing the Boston Celtics and their newly formed Big Three of Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Ray Allen. Though we lost that series, a particularly painful defeat given the historic Lakers-Celtics rivalry, it represented a return to relevance, to championship contention. The loss to Boston was more than just another defeat. It was a specific humiliation that required a specific response. Game 6 of that series stands as one of the most painful experiences of my career. We didn't just lose. We were embarrassed, beaten by 39 points, our weaknesses exposed under the unforgiving lights of TD Garden. I remember sitting in the locker room afterward, still in my uniform, while teammates showered and dressed around me. The sounds of Celtic celebration echoed through the arena walls. The green and white confetti. The chants of Beat LA transformed into Beat Kobe. The smirking satisfaction of Boston fans who had just added another chapter to their storied history at our expense. In that moment, something hardened within me, a resolve that went beyond normal competitive response. This wasn't just about winning a championship the following year. This was about erasing this specific memory, about replacing it with its opposite. That summer, I approached training with renewed purpose. The Beijing Olympics provided an unexpected catalyst for growth. Playing alongside LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Carmelo Anthony, competitors who had become contemporaries challenging my position at the top of the basketball hierarchy, I observed their approaches, their habits, their perspectives. More significantly, the Olympic experience reminded me of something I had forgotten amidst the isolation and conflict of recent years, the pure joy of basketball played at its highest level. Not that winning became less important. If anything, the taste of gold intensified my hunger for another NBA championship, but I reconnected with the fundamental love of the game that had first set me apart as a child on those Italian playgrounds. Returning to the Lakers for the 2008 to 2009 season, I brought this rekindled passion along with the targeted improvements developed over the summer. The team responded to this evolved approach. My demands remained exacting, but now carried more nuance, more understanding of individual differences and motivations. The results were immediate and profound. We dominated the regular season, then moved through the playoffs with a sense of inevitability. When we defeated the Orlando Magic in the finals, securing my fourth championship and first without Shaq, the validation was complete. Standing on the court as confetti fell, I felt a completeness that transcended the victory itself. This wasn't just about proving I could win without Shaq. though that narrative dominated media coverage. This was about the evolution of the Mamba mentality from a solitary pursuit to a collective ethos, from isolation to elevation. The journey from the fractured partnership with Shaq to this moment of redemption had stripped away pretense, forced confrontation with weaknesses both basketball and personal, and ultimately forged something more resilient than what had come before. The hunger remained undiminished, the standards uncompromised, but the application had matured. In the locker room celebration afterward, Phil Jackson found me sitting alone, momentarily separated from the champagne-soaked chaos. "You found a different way," he said, nodding toward the teammates celebrating nearby. "Still the same destination," I replied. "But the journey shapes the arrival," he countered. "This one's different. This one's yours." He was right, though not in the way most would interpret. This championship wasn't mine because I had dominated alone or proven individual greatness. It was mine because it reflected a version of excellence it had discovered through failure, isolation, and reinvention, a version that harmonized individual brilliance with collective purpose. The Mamba had evolved not by becoming less deadly, but by becoming more precise in its targets. The ferocity remained, the uncompromising nature intact, but now directed with greater wisdom, greater purpose. As I left the arena that night, trophy secured but mind already shifting toward the next challenge, I understood that the redemption was incomplete. The Celtics still held the most recent victory in our historic rivalry. That specific humiliation remained unerased, that specific pain unaddressed. The Mamba wasn't satisfied. The wounds of Colorado, of Shaq's departure, of the wilderness years, they had formed scars that strengthened rather than weakened. But the wound of Boston remained fresh, throbbing with each heartbeat. That night, as champagne dried on my skin and the weight of the trophy still lingered in my hands, it made a silent promise. This isn't over. The story doesn't end with redemption. It ends with vengeance. What no one else could see, what perhaps even I didn't fully acknowledge, was that behind the triumph lay a darker truth. Greatness always exacts a price. The physical toll was mounting. The years of relentless training, of playing through injuries, of demanding more from my body than bodies are designed to give, it created a debt that would eventually come due. But that was a concern for another day. Tonight belonged to the Mamba, to the vindication of a philosophy forged in darkness but ultimately defined by light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new doubts, new critics, and I couldn't wait. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like. It helps a lot and keeps us bringing more content like this. The taste of redemption is sweet but fleeting. That's the cruel paradox of success. The moment of triumph contains the seeds of its own dissolution. The instant you reach the summit, the only possible direction is down. The morning after winning the 2009 championship, I was back in the gym before sunrise. No celebration, no parade appearances. Just me, a ball, and the familiar symphony of squeaking shoes on hardwood. The championship glow that enveloped Los Angeles hadn't touched me. In my mind, the work was half finished. The Celtics still haunted me. That humiliating Game 6 loss in Boston the previous year remained an open wound. The 39-point demolition. The sea of green confetti. Kevin Garnett screaming at the rafters. Paul Pierce hoisting the trophy that should have been mine. These images played on continuous loop in my mind. A personalized torture reel that no amount of success against Orlando could erase. The 2009 to 2010 season unfolded with this singular focus driving every decision, every practice, every game. What the cameras didn't capture were the first undeniable signs of physical decline. At 31, with 14 NBA seasons of mileage compounded by deep playoff runs and international competition, my body was beginning to register complaints with increasing frequency. The right knee, which had bothered me intermittently for years, now required constant management. The team doctors recommended surgery, a procedure that would sideline me for months. I refused, not with the possibility of Boston in the finals. Instead, I adapted. 3 hours of pre-game treatment became the norm. Whatever it took to get on the court for those 48 minutes. This physical deterioration remained my most closely guarded secret. In the locker room, I hid grimaces behind towels. On court, I compensated with footwork and positioning what I could no longer accomplish with raw athleticism. I remember a conversation with our athletic trainer during the first round against Oklahoma City. He had just finished another treatment on my knee, his face betraying concern he tried to mask. "You know this isn't sustainable," he said quietly. "At some point, your body will make the decision for you." I met his gaze directly. "The future doesn't exist unless we win now." He didn't respond, but his expression spoke volumes. He saw what I refused to acknowledge, that the Black Mamba was engaged in a war of attrition against time itself, and time remains undefeated. We advanced through the Western playoffs with a combination of experience, system execution, and moments of individual brilliance when nothing else worked. Each series demanded different solutions, different approaches, but all paled in comparison to what awaited in the finals, the matchup I had craved for 2 years. The Boston Celtics. The 2010 finals weren't just basketball games. They were psychological warfare, a 7-game battle off wheels where statistics and strategy became secondary to resilience and resolve. Every screen was a collision. Every drive to the basket met with punishment. Every possession a chess match within a street fight. The series unfolded like a classical drama, momentum shifting unpredictably. We took Game 1 at home. They countered in Game 2. We reclaimed advantage in Game 3. They responded with consecutive wins in Games 4 and 5, pushing us to the brink of elimination. Game 5 in Boston represented a crucible moment. Down 3-2 in the series, returning to the scene of our humiliation 2 years earlier. The Boston crowd was ravenous, sensing another championship, another opportunity to crush the Lakers on their hallowed parquet floor. The physical toll had reached critical levels. My knee contained so much fluid that each step sent lightning bolts of pain up my leg. A broken finger throbbed with every dribble. During a timeout, I glanced down to see blood seeping through my shoe, the result of a broken toe that had torn through the skin. These details never made the broadcasts. The viewing public saw only the performance, not the cost. And in Game 5, the performance was subpar by any measure. I shot poorly, missed defensive assignments, looked a step slow. The Celtics won convincingly, pushing us to the brink of elimination. The locker room afterward was more quiet. The oppressive sense of history repeating itself hung in the air like smoke. I sat at my locker, still in my blood-soaked uniform, a towel draped over my head. For a rare moment, doubt crept in, not about my will or determination, but about the physical reality. Could embody this broken summon what was necessary for 2 more games against this opponent? That night in the hotel, I couldn't sleep. The pain was too intense, too constant. Around 3 a.m., I drew a bath as hot as I could stand, hoping the heat would loosen the swelling in my knee. As I sat in the steaming water, I found myself doing something I hadn't done since childhood. I prayed. Not for victory, but for strength. Not for relief from pain, but for the capacity to transform it into fuel. When we returned to Los Angeles for Game 6, something had changed. Not in my body, which remained a collection of injuries held together by athletic tape and stubbornness, but in my mind. The desperation had been replaced by clarity. The doubt had hardened into certainty. In the locker room before the game, Phil Jackson sensed the shift. "You found something," he said, more observation than question. "They think they've broken me," I replied. "They've just shown me exactly what I need to do." Game 6 became a demonstration of will over circumstance. We dominated from the opening tip, never trailing, pushing the lead to 25 points. My stat line wasn't extraordinary, 26 points on mediocre shooting, but my defensive intensity and decision-making set a tone that teammates followed. We forced a Game 7. The night before the decisive game, I didn't review film or strategy. I already knew everything about the Celtics, their tendencies, their plays, their personnel. Instead, I spent hours in meditation, visualizing not just the game, but the specific moments of adversity that would inevitably arise. In my mind, I rehearsed responses to every possible scenario, preparing the neural pathways for what was to come. Game 7 unfolded as a masterpiece of tension. Ugly, physical, defensive, exactly as the Celtics wanted it. Neither team shot well. Possessions became increasingly precious as the game remained tight throughout. With 6 minutes remaining in the fourth quarter, we trailed by 4 points. The momentum had shifted to Boston. The ghosts of 2008 loomed. In a huddle during a timeout, faces showed the strain of the moment. Phil remained calm, diagramming a play, but the tension was palpable. When he finished, he looked at me. No words were necessary. This was the moment that would define legacies. The next 5 minutes became a blur of determination, not through spectacular shooting or highlight plays, but through sheer will. Defensive stops, offensive rebounds, free throws, the mundane components of basketball that, when executed under maximum pressure, separate champions from contenders. When the final buzzer sounded, we had won 83-79. My shooting had been atrocious, 6 for 24 from the field, but I had grabbed 15 rebounds, many in crucial moments, and made 11 of 15 free throws. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't efficient, but it was exactly what was needed. In the celebration that followed, as confetti fell and the trophy was presented, I experienced something rare, a moment of perfect contentment. Not happiness, which is fleeting, but a deeper satisfaction. The demons of 2008 had been exorcised. The doubts about winning without Shaq had been permanently silenced. The journey from prodigy to villain to redeemed champion was complete. I should have recognized it then, that this represented a perfect ending, a natural conclusion to the narrative arc. But athletes rarely see endings until they've already passed. The hunger that drives you to greatness doesn't simply switch off because a particular goal has been achieved. And so, rather than recognizing the 2010 championship as the summit of my career, I saw it merely as a plateau from which to climb higher. The 2010 to 2011 season began with talk of a three-peat, of cementing a dynasty, of chasing Jordan's 6 championships. My body had other ideas. The knee that had barely cooperated during the 2010 playoffs now rebelled completely. After trying to play through the first months of the season, I finally relented to surgery in April, just before the playoffs began. The procedure alleviated the worst of the pain, but couldn't restore what years of punishment had taken. We entered the playoffs as defending champions, but without the physical fortitude that had defined our previous runs. The Dallas Mavericks, led by Dirk Nowitzki on his own redemption quest, exposed every weakness in our aging roster. The end came not with a valiant last stand, but with humiliation. Game 4 of the second round, down 3-0 inches the series, we were systematically dismantled. The final score, 122-86, didn't fully capture the one-sided nature of the defeat. In the third quarter, frustration boiled over. I committed a flagrant foul on Jason Terry that resulted in ejection. A loss of composure uncharacteristic, but revealing of the internal struggle between the competitor who couldn't accept defeat and the veteran who recognized the inevitable. The locker room afterward was silent except for the sounds of equipment being packed. Phil Jackson, coaching his final game after an unparalleled career, said nothing. Words were superfluous. An era had ended, not with celebration, but with surrender. That summer brought the NBA lockout, a blessing in disguise that allowed extended recovery time away from the pressures of the season. When play resumed in December 2011 for a shortened 66-game season, I returned refreshed physically, but entering a basketball landscape that had shifted dramatically. LeBron James and the Miami Heat had emerged as the league's new force. Oklahoma City's young core had matured into contenders. A new generation of stars, Derrick Rose, Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, had ascended, bringing styles and approaches that emphasized athleticism and pace. I adjusted my game accordingly, relying more on post play, on footwork, on the accumulated knowledge of 15 seasons. We remained competitive, but the championship window had clearly narrowed. Then came a summer of 2012 and another attempt at reinvention. The formation of a new super team, with the acquisitions of Dwight Howard and Steve Nash. On paper, the moves made perfect sense. Nash, one of the greatest point guards in history. Howard, the league's most dominant center. Paired with Powell and myself, it seemed a formidable response to Miami's Big Three. Reality proved less accommodating. Chemistry issues surfaced immediately. Howard's personality clashed with the culture of accountability it had established. Nash's body betrayed him almost immediately, limiting his effectiveness. My own physical decline continued its inexorable progression. We struggled to integrate pieces that, while individually brilliant, never cohered into a functioning unit. By January 2013, we were below .500, in danger of missing the playoffs entirely. The strain manifested in visible tension on the court, in terse post-game interviews, in practice confrontations that occasionally leaked to the media. I responded the only way I knew, by trying to carry more of the burden myself, by playing more minutes, by demanding more from a body already giving all it could. Then came the night that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of my career and life. April 12, 2013. A home game against the Golden State Warriors. We were fighting for playoff positioning, every game crucial. I had played 45 minutes of a 48-minute game, an unsustainable workload for a 34-year-old with 17 seasons of NBA mileage, but necessity dictated the risk. With 3:08 remaining in the fourth quarter, I drove left from the top of the key, a move executed thousands of times throughout my career. As I planted to change direction, I felt something that cannot adequately describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. A sensation like being shot in the back off the leg, like the floor suddenly giving way beneath you, like the connection between mind and body severing in an instant. I looked behind me, certain someone had kicked me. There was no one there. In that moment, even before the medical confirmation, I knew what had happened. The Achilles tendon had ruptured completely. The pain was secondary to the horror of recognition. That this represented more than an injury, more than a setback. This was an ending, not just of a season, but potentially of a career, of an identity, of the only self I had known since childhood. Medical protocol dictated immediate removal from the game, but I would not, leave the court in that manner. Not carried, not helped. I would walk off on my own terms. I stepped to the free throw line, my leg numb, my mind detached from the surrounding arena, the chanting crowd, the concerned teammates. I made both free throws, then walked to the locker room, each step in negotiation between will and physical reality. The MRI confirmed what I already knew. Complete rupture. Surgery required. Recovery time estimated at 9-12 months, an eternity in basketball years, a death sentence for most players my age. That night, alone in my hospital room waiting for morning surgery, I experienced what can only be described as an existential crisis. The questions came in waves. Who am I without basketball? What is my value if I can't perform? Is this how it ends? Not with a ceremonial farewell, but with a sudden biological failure? I posted on Facebook at 3:30 a.m., a raw expression of anger, frustration, and ultimately, defiance. The media characterized it as a typical Kobe response. Fierce, uncompromising, perhaps delusional in its refusal to accept physical reality. They missed the vulnerability beneath the words, the genuine terror of confronting, for the first time, the limits of will against the realities of biological decline. The rehabilitation process that followed was the darkest period of my career. Physically, it was excruciating, the pain of the surgery, the tedium of incremental progress, the frustration of movements once automatic, now requiring conscious effort. But the psychological dimension proved far more challenging. For the first time, I confronted mortality, not in the abstract philosophical sense, but in the immediate reality of a body failing despite every effort to maintain it. The recognition that no amount of pre-dawn workouts, no degree of mental fortitude, no specialized training or diet or recovery protocol could reverse the fundamental equation of time. 3 months into rehab, I hit the lowest point. Progress had plateaued. Pain remained constant. The Lakers had been swept from the playoffs. The NBA had continued without me, indifferent to my absence. Younger stars had claimed the spotlight. The sports conversation had moved on, as it always does, leaving yesterday's heroes to either reinvent themselves or fade into nostalgic reference. I remember sitting in my home gym at midnight, attempting simple calf raises that had once been too basic to even consider as exercise. Now, they represented mountains to be climbed. Sweat dripped onto the floor with each agonizing repetition. Tears soon followed, not from physical pain, but from the recognition of what had been lost, what might never return. In that moment of absolute despair, something unexpected happened. Not an epiphany or spiritual revelation, but a quiet clarity. The Mamba identity I had constructed, the unstoppable force, the indomitable will, the competitor who refused all limitations, had served its purpose. It had carried me to 5 championships, to the summit of the basketball world, to a legacy secured beyond any reasonable doubt. But could not serve me now. This challenge required something different. Not the blind defiance of limitations, but the wisdom to work within them. Not the isolation of the predator, but the integration of all I had learned, all I had become beyond the narrow definition of basketball excellence. The rehabilitation continued, but with a different energy. The desperation gave way to curiosity. Could I reinvent my game once more? Could I find value in the journey itself, rather than just the destination off returning? Could I transform what appeared to be an ending into another beginning? I returned to the court in December 2013, just 8 months after the rupture, ahead of medical projections, but clearly a different player. The explosiveness was diminished, the stamina reduced. The physical tools that had compensated for any tactical disadvantage were no longer reliable. 6 games into the comeback, another setback, a fracture in my left knee that sidelined me for most of the season. The pattern would repeat over the next 2 years. Brief returns, different injuries, extended absences. The body I had pushed beyond reasonable limits for 2 decades was presenting its accumulated bill. These physical struggles coincided with the Lakers' organizational decline. The championship core had dispersed. Coaching changes, front office restructuring. We became what I had always dreaded, a lottery team, playing meaningless games, enduring seasons without playoff aspirations. The competitor in me raged against this reality. But the wisdom that can only come through suffering began to temper that rage with perspective. I started to see my role differently, not just as the scoring champion or defensive stopper or clutch performer, but as a bridge between eras, a repository of knowledge accumulated through 20 years at the highest level. Younger teammates who might once have feared my intensity now sought my counsel. Opponents who had modeled aspects of their games on mine now approached with questions after games. The isolation that had defined so much of my career began to give way to connection. Still selective, still on my terms, but connection nonetheless. By the autumn of 2015, I recognized the inevitable. The body would not allow another season beyond the current one. The decision brought not despair, but surprising peace. For the first time in my career, I could see the end clearly, could prepare for it on my own terms. I announced my retirement through a poem titled Dear Basketball, a love letter to the game that had given me everything and taken just as much in return. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Each remaining game on the schedule transformed into a stop on a farewell tour I had never wanted but came to appreciate as a gift. The rare opportunity to consciously experience an ending while it unfolds. Road games in cities I had once entered as the villain now featured video tributes, standing ovations, genuine appreciation from fans who had spent years cursing my name. Opponents who had grown up watching me now sought jerseys to be signed, photos to be taken, moments to be shared. The narrative had shifted from the present tense of competition to the past tense of legacy. I accepted these tributes with gratitude, but refused to let sentimentality overtake the work still to bed one. Even in this final season, with a body held together by athletic tape and cortisone injections, with a team headed nowhere in the standings, the standards remained. Pre-dawn workouts, film study, complete investment in the process, regardless of outcome. As the final game approached, April 13th, 2016, against the Utah Jazz at Staples Center, the external energy reached fever pitch. Ticket prices soared to Super Bowl levels. Celebrities scrambled for courtside seats. Media from around the world descended on Los Angeles for what had been branded as Mamba Day. The internal experience was more complex. The finality of it struck me with unexpected force. This was the last time I would lace up for an NBA game. The last national anthem as a player. The last introduction. The last everything of a life that had defined me since childhood. The pre-game ceremony was a blur of emotion and tribute. Magic Johnson's introduction. The video montage spanning 20 years. The roar of the crowd that seemed to shake the foundation of the arena itself. I stood at center court, simultaneously present in the moment and detached from it, an observer off my own experience. As the game began, the surrealism continued. My first few shots missed badly. Too much adrenaline, too much emotion. The Jazz built an early lead. On the bench during a timeout, I reminded myself, focus on the process. Be present. Find the flow. The shots started falling in the second quarter, then more in the third. As the fourth quarter began, something shifted in the atmosphere. We were down by double digits. The game seemingly a formality before the real celebration. But competitive instinct doesn't recognize ceremonial occasions. With 9 minutes remaining, I hit a three-pointer that sparked something in me, in the crowd, in the very fabric of the moment. The deficit began to shrink. Another basket, then another. The crowd's energy transformed from appreciative to urgent, from celebratory to demanding. They weren't just witnessing a farewell. They were experiencing a resurrection. With 5:02 remaining, we took the lead. The building exploded. Teammates who had spent the season referring to me now actively sought to feed the moment, to contribute to something they recognized as transcending normal basketball parameters. Every possession became a referendum on possibility. Could this actually be happening? The final 3 minutes unfolded with dreamlike quality. Fatigue disappeared. Pain vanished. The accumulated wisdom of 20 seasons, every lesson learned through triumph and failure, distilled into a perfect clarity of purpose. Each shot felt predestined, each move extracted from muscle memory so deeply ingrained it had become instinct. With 31 seconds remaining, I hit a 20-foot pull-up jumper that put us ahead for good. The statistical line defied logic. 60 points on 50 shots, outscoring the entire Jazz team 23-21 in the fourth quarter. At 37 years old, with a body betraying me at every turn, I had somehow channeled a performance that belonged to a younger man, a different era. The final buzzer unleashed bedlam. Teammates mobbed me. Opponents offered congratulations. The crowd chanted with unified voice. I stood at center court, sweat-soaked, exhausted beyond description, experiencing something I had felt only a handful of times in 2 decades. The perfect synthesis of preparation and execution, of intention and outcome. In the locker room afterward, surrounded by cameras documenting every expression, every interaction, I felt a surprising lightness. The weight of expectation, of legacy, of the constant drive for more, it had lifted. Not because 60 points in a farewell game somehow completed the story, but because I had finally, after 20 years, learned the lesson that had always eluded me. The beauty isn't in the achievement, but in the attempt. Not in the victory, but in the willingness to risk defeat. As I stepped to the podium for the final press conference of my playing career, I surveyed the assembled media. Many familiar faces who had documented every triumph and failure, who had alternately deified and demonized me as the narrative required. They waited for profundity, for the perfect encapsulation of 20 years distilled into quotable wisdom. Mamba out, I said simply, tapping the microphone before stepping away. Walking out of Staples Center that night, I passed the statues of Lakers legends, Magic Kareem, West Chickhearn, men who had defined eras, who had transcended the sport to become cultural touchstones that I allowed myself a moment to imagine joining them someday, cast in bronze for future generations. But that thought quickly gave way to something more immediate, more energizing. The end of one chapter meant the beginning of another. The farewell wasn't a conclusion, but a transition. The Mamba Mentality had never been solely about basketball. It was about approach, about process, about the relentless pursuit of improvement in any arena. What would that look like beyond basketball? What mountains remained to be climbed? What new skills could be developed with the same focus that had transformed a skinny teenager into a five-time champion? These questions didn't provoke anxiety, but excitement. The journey wasn't ending. It was evolving. As I drove home in the pre-dawn hours, the city lights reflecting off the still damp jersey I hadn't bothered change, I felt a surge of anticipation for what lay ahead. Not retirement in the traditional sense. Rounds of golf, ceremonial appearances, living on past glories, but reinvention. New challenges, new failures to learn from, new versions of excellence to pursue. The Black Mamba had served its purpose, had carried me through the most competitive years in the most competitive league on the planet. But the man behind the persona still had chapters to write, still had growth to experience, still had life to live with the same intensity that had defined his playing career. The 60-point finale wasn't the end of the story. It was merely the end of the prologue. The strangest moment of retirement comes on the first morning after. For 20 years, I had awakened before dawn with absolute clarity of purpose, to train, to improve, to prepare for the next game, the next season, the next challenge. Now I open my eyes to what? The silence was disorienting. No alarm, no schedule, no treatment sessions for nagging injuries, not practice, no film study. The machinery of professional athletics that had structured every hour of every day had suddenly stopped. The freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. Most athletes speak of a void after retirement, a hollowness where purpose once resided. I had witnessed too many of my predecessors fall into this trap, clinging to fading glory, attempting comebacks, struggling to find meaning in a world that no longer revolved around their athletic prowess. I had vowed this wouldn't be my story. The end of basketball wouldn't be the end of ambition. The question wasn't whether I would find new mountains to climb, but which ones I would choose. The Mamba Mentality had never been solely about basketball. It was about approach, about process, about the relentless pursuit of excellence in any arena. Now came the opportunity to prove it. The first morning of retirement, I did something unprecedented. I slept in until 6 a.m. For someone accustomed to 4 a.m. workouts, this qualified as decadence. Then I did something even more unusual. It took my daughters to school, not as a special occasion or photo opportunity, but as a father fully present, unrushed by the demands of the NBA schedule. "Dad, are you driving us every day now?" Gianna asked, a mixture of surprise and hope in her voice. "As often as I can," I replied. She considered this for a moment. "I like retirement already." That simple exchange contained a truth I was only beginning to appreciate. For all the accolades and achievements of my basketball career, there were fundamental aspects of life I had sacrificed, routine moments of fatherhood, of partnership, of simply being present without the constant pull of professional demands. Retirement offered not just new professional horizons, but a recalibration of personal priorities. Vanessa had been the foundation that made my career possible, managing our home, raising our daughters, providing stability while I pursued basketball obsessively. Now I could finally be the partner she deserved, the father my daughters needed, not just in the highlight moments, but in the mundane Tuesday afternoons that constitute real life. But the competitor doesn't simply disappear because the uniform comes off. The drive that had pushed him through pre-dawn workouts and post-game ice baths now sought new outlets, new challenges worthy of full engagement. I had been preparing for this transition long before my farewell game. In 2013, while recovering from the Achilles rupture, I had founded Kobe Incorporated, a media and investment company. What had begun as a forward-thinking business move now became the vehicle for the next chapter. What surprised many was the direction I chose. Most former athletes gravitate toward familiar territory, sports commentary, coaching, franchise ownership. I wanted something different, something that would challenge entirely new facets of my capabilities, something that would allow me to be both student and master simultaneously. I had always been drawn to storytelling. As a child in Italy, I had devoured books, losing myself in narratives that transported me beyond my circumstances. Throughout my career, I had studied how stories shape perception, how mythology and reality intertwined in the public consciousness of athletic achievement. Now I would attempt to master this art form itself. Dear Basketball, the retirement announcement that had marked the end of my playing career became a foundation for something unexpected, an animated short film that would translate those words into visual poetry. I approached this project with the same methodical intensity that had characterized my basketball preparation. If I was going to enter the world of filmmaking, it wouldn't be as a celebrity trading on name recognition, but as a creator committed to excellence in this new arena. I sought out Glenn Keane, a legendary Disney animator responsible for characters that had defined generations. I approached Hans Zimmer, one of the most accomplished composers in film history, not for endorsements or surface-level associations, but as genuine collaborators in creating something worthy of their artistry. The process was humbling. I had spent decades at the absolute pinnacle of one profession. Now I was on Vice, learning fundamental concepts, making basic mistakes, developing entirely new skills. The familiar voice of doubt that athletes know all too well returned. Who are you to think you belong in this world? What makes you believe your basketball success translates to creative endeavors? I silenced these doubts the same way I had on the court, through obsessive preparation, through study, through surrounding myself with masters of the craft and absorbing everything they offered. I immersed myself in animation techniques, in storytelling principles, in a language of visual communication. I approached filmmaking with the same reverence and hunger that had once characterized my approach to basketball. When Dear Basketball won the Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film in 2018, the narrative in many quarters was predictable. The basketball superstar leveraging celebrity to collect another trophy. Those closer to the process knew differently. The Oscar wasn't the result of name recognition, but of genuine creative contribution, of authentic artistic growth, of approaching a new discipline with appropriate humility combined with unrelenting standards. Standing on that stage, Oscar in hand, I experienced something I've felt only a handful of times during my basketball career: the satisfaction of exceeding even my own expectations. Not because the award itself carried such significance, but because it represented successful transformation. The Mamba had not just survived outside his natural habitat, he had thrived. This initial success in filmmaking catalyzed broader, creative ambitions. Storytelling, particularly for the next generation, became a focal point of my post-basketball identity. The Wisenard series, a young adult fantasy fiction project, allowed me to blend athletic themes with imaginative narratives designed to inspire young readers. These weren't celebrity vanity projects, but genuine attempts to translate the principles that had guided my career into lessons accessible to children finding their own paths. My business ventures followed the same philosophy, not fame-trading endorsements, but strategic investments where I could contribute beyond capital. I approached boardrooms with the same preparation I once brought to playoff games, studying market trends and business models with the same intensity I had once reserved for opposing defenses. One morning, I sat across from Jeff Stibble, my partner in our venture capital firm, reviewing potential investments. After hours analyzing market projections and founder backgrounds, he looked up with a bemused expression. "You know, most celebrity investors just write checks and show up for photo ops," he said. "I'm not most celebrity investors," I replied, pulling up another spreadsheet of data I had analyzed overnight. He laughed. "The scary part is, you're actually better at due diligence than some career finance people I know." What he recognized was simple. The Mamba Mentality wasn't a basketball strategy, but a life approach. The details changed, defensive rotations became market analyses, shooting drills became pitch evaluations, but the underlying principles remained identical. preparation, focus, continuous improvement, comfort with discomfort. The same framework that had produced championships now generated business success. But these professional endeavors, gratifying as they were, remained secondary to what was emerging as me true post-career passion, mentorship particularly of the next generation of athletes. Gianna, my second daughter, had developed her own basketball obsession. Her interest wasn't a productive paternal pressure, but an organic passion that emerged from her own competitive nature. Watching her fall in love with the game rekindled my relationship with basketball, transforming it from the profession that had defined and occasionally consumed me into a shared language through which we connected. We began attending WNBA and NBA games together, analyzing player movements, discussing strategies. Her basketball intelligence was startling, not just for her age, but by any standard. She absorbed concepts instantly, processed information with remarkable clarity, and applied learnings with a precision that reminded me of myself at a young age. More significantly, she played with a competitive fire immediately recognizable to anyone who had watched my career. The intensity, the refusal to accept limitations, the determination that occasionally bordered on stubbornness. Watching her was like witnessing some genetic transmission of the Mamba mentality, passed not through deliberate instruction, but through observation and shared DNA. I began coaching her team, the Mambas. What started as casual involvement evolved into serious commitment. I applied the same analytical approach that had characterized my playing career, breaking down fundamentals, teaching not just how to execute movements, but why certain decisions created advantages. The girls responded with a dedication that would have impressed professionals. This coaching experience revealed something unexpected. I actually enjoyed teaching. The satisfaction of watching young players grasp concepts, of seeing their confidence grow as skills developed, provided a fulfillment different from, but comparable to my playing achievements. The competitor who had once been notoriously impatient found unexpected reserves of pedagogy. This mentorship extended beyond Gianna's team to the broader basketball community. Current NBA and WNBA stars began seeking my counsel, requesting workout sessions, text messaging questions about footwork, defensive positioning, mental preparation. Trae Young, Kyrie Irving, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Jason Tatum, Sabrina Ionescu. The list grew organically as word spread about the value of these exchanges. What they discovered was not the intimidating, hyper-competitive Black Mamba of legend, but a thoughtful educator who had processed 2 decades of elite competition into transferable wisdom. I didn't just demonstrate techniques. I explained the thinking behind them, the situations where they applied, the counters to expect from opponents, the subtle advantages to be gained through precise execution. The detail series I created for ESPN embodied this analytical approach, breaking down game footage with a level of specificity rarely attempted in sports media. Not focused on hot takes or personality-driven commentary, but on the intricate chess match underlying basketball's physical spectacle. The series found an audience not of casual fans, but of genuine students of the game, players, coaches, and viewers seeking deeper understanding rather than entertainment. This evolution from player to mentor wasn't without complications. The intensity that had defined my playing career occasionally surfaced in coaching contexts, sometimes misaligned with youth development principles. I had to recalibrate, to recognize that the standards appropriate for NBA championships didn't translate directly to middle school competitions. Gianna provided the perfect balance to these tendencies. She possessed enough of my competitive nature to respect the demands of excellence, but enough of her own personality to call me out when intensity became counterproductive. "Dad, they're 13, she would say when I diagrammed overly complex offensive sets. Maybe simplify. One practice, I spent 15 minutes detailing a defensive rotation scheme involving multiple switches and help principles. As the girl's eyes glazed over, Gianna raised her hand. "Question?" I asked. "Yes," she said with that perfect mix of respect and teenage exasperation. "Could we maybe just start with staying in front of our own player before we try to become the 2000 Lakers?" The team erupted in laughter. I stood there, marker in hand, momentarily startled by this challenge to my authority, then joined in the laughter. She was right, of course. My approach had been excessive for their development stage. In that moment, the student had become a teacher. These years after retirement brought a personal contentment that had often eluded me during my playing career. The obsessive focus required to maintain basketball excellence had created a certain emotional narrowness, a limitation of bandwidth for anything outside the pursuit of championships. Now, with that singular pressure removed, I discovered a capacity for joy previously untapped. Morning drives with the girls, filled with music and conversation. Date nights with Vanessa, uninterrupted by road trips or recovery protocols. Casual dinners with friends where basketball wasn't the central topic. Family vacations without the ticking clock of training camp approaching. These ordinary pleasures, common to most lives, but so rare in mine, now formed the foundation of days that felt simultaneously simpler and richer. This isn't to suggest the competitive fire had dimmed. It had simply found new expressions, new challenges worthy of the same intensity once reserved for basketball. Film projects, business ventures, coaching, each approached with a detailed preparation and unwavering standards that had characterized my athletic career. The Mamba Mentality remained the operating system, but now ran on different hardware, processing new inputs, generating different outputs. The principles remained constant: attention to detail, embracing the process, continual improvement, mental fortitude, but their application had broadened beyond a 94 by 50-foot dimensions of a basketball court. On January 26, 2020, Gianna and I were traveling to a basketball tournament at the Mamba Sports Academy, the training facility I had established to develop young athletes. The helicopter trip was routine, a practical solution to Southern California traffic, allowing more time for preparation and less time in transit. Accompanying us were teammates from Gianna's team, parents, and a coach, a community united by shared passion for the game that had defined my life. The crash that claimed 9 lives that foggy morning in Calabasas represented an ending too abrupt, too cruel, too incomprehensible to process through conventional grief frameworks. A life of carefully controlled variables, of preparation overcoming circumstance, of will-conquering limitation, concluded in a moment of absolute randomness, a cosmic cruelty beyond any rational understanding. The moment news broke, the world seemed to stop. Players in NBA games, informed mid-contest, broke down on benches. Fans gathered spontaneously outside Staples Center, a growing sea of jerseys, flowers, basketballs, handwritten letters. Strangers embraced, united in shared grief. Cities worldwide saw murals appear overnight, massive artistic tributes spanning entire buildings. The Grammy Awards, occurring that very evening in the arena I had called home for 2 decades, transformed into an impromptu memorial. LeBron James, who had just passed me on the all-time scoring list the night before, was photographed in tears on the tarmac as the Lakers plane returned to Los Angeles. Shaquille O'Neal, my once rival and later reconciled championship partner, spoke through sobs on television. I lost my little brother. What made the grief so universal wasn't just the shock or the celebrity, but what I had come to represent beyond basketball. The crash didn't just claim a sports figure. It severed a living connection to a philosophy that had transcended the game itself. In the days that followed, stories emerged that revealed dimensions of my life unknown to the public. The pre-dawn workouts with WNBA players who had sought mentorship. The anonymous financial support for young athletes unable to afford training. The quiet visits to children's hospitals without cameras or publicity. The consistent championing of women's basketball as deserving equal respect and resources. At the public memorial held at Staples Center, Vanessa delivered a eulogy that captured what the cameras had never fully seen. The devoted father behind the competitor, the playful spirit behind the intensity, the mentor who had found in Gianna a kindred basketball soul. God knew they couldn't be on this earth without each other, she said through tears. He had to bring them home to heaven together. Michael Jordan, My childhood idol and lifelong measuring stick spoke with raw emotion rarely displayed by the typically guarded icon. When Kobe died, a piece of me died. In that moment, the most competitive player in basketball history abandoned all pretense to reveal the human connection beneath the athletic rivalry. What emerged in the aftermath was a clearer understanding of impact. The Mamba mentality had transcended sports to become a philosophical approach to challenge, to excellence, to the everyday decisions that collectively define a life's direction. In boardrooms and classrooms, in athletic competitions and artistic endeavors, people had found inspiration in the ethos I had embodied. Not perfection, but the unrelenting pursuit of it. Not victory in every battle, but the willingness to engage fully in each one, that not freedom from failure, but the courage to risk it in service of growth. A month after the crash, I watched as a high school basketball team in a small California town broke their huddle not with the traditional 1-2-3 team, but with 1-2-3 Mamba. The players weren't old enough to have witnessed my championship years. They knew me more from YouTube highlights, retirement ceremonies, perhaps the Oscar win. Yet the mentality had reached them, had provided a framework for their own aspirations. That same week, a young entrepreneur in Chicago named her startup's conference room the Mamba Room, not as a shrine to basketball accomplishments, but as a reminder of the standard expected. Within those walls, a third-grade teacher in Boston incorporated Mamba moments into her curriculum, periods when students were encouraged to embrace rather than avoid difficult challenges. The mentality had escaped the boundaries of basketball to become something universal, a vocabulary for the pursuit of excellence, a framework for approaching challenge, a permission structure for demanding more from oneself and others without apology. The most meaningful legacy isn't measured in statistics or awards, but in influence, in how you change the approach of those who come after you, in the standards you establish that others feel compelled to meet or exceed, in the permission you grant through example to pursue excellence without apology. The Mamba mentality was never about me. It was about the universal human capacity to transcend limitation through preparation, focus, and unwavering commitment to incremental improvement. My career simply provided a visible demonstration of these principles applied consistently over decades, through triumph and failure, through acclaim and criticism, through physical prime and inevitable decline. I often told young players that the most important quality in pursuing greatness wasn't talent or even work ethic, but curiosity, the genuine desire to understand why certain approaches succeed while others fail, to question assumptions, to remain a student even while becoming a master. This curiosity powered me evolution from player to mentor, from athlete to storyteller, from individual competitor to communal contributor. Perhaps the most powerful testament to this legacy came in the WNBA bubble season following the crash. Players wore shoes emblazoned with 8 and 24, my jersey numbers. Teams ran 24 and 8 second violations to open games, deliberately turning over the ball in symbolic tribute. Sabrina Ionescu, the Oregon star who had trained with Gianna and me, dedicated her rookie season to our memory. In her WNBA debut, she scored exactly 12 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists. The numbers of my family: myself, 24, Gianna, 2, and our family of 6. When asked if she had engineered this statistical alignment deliberately, she smiled and said simply, "The Mamba is always watching." That's the enduring power of the mentality. It continues in those who absorbed its lessons, who found in me example not just athletic inspiration, but a transferable approach to any challenge. Not as mythology, but as methodology. Not as hero worship, but as practical framework. In the end, what remains after the final buzzer, after the cheering stops, after the spotlight shifts, is the example set, not of perfection achieved, but of excellence pursued. Not of battles always won, but off challenges always accepted. Not of pain avoided, but of purpose that made the pain worthwhile. The journey from that skinny kid on Italian playgrounds to the 5-time champion to the mentor and creator I became after retirement wasn't a straight line of ascension, but a series of reinventions, each requiring the courage to risk failure in pursuit of growth. The willingness to begin again as a novice after mastering one arena. The humility to learn new skills after being celebrated for old ones. The vulnerability to attempt that which might end in public failure after experiencing the highest levels of public success. And so the mentality continues, not in memory, but in practice. Not in nostalgia, but in present application. Wherever someone chooses the harder path because of the growth it promises. Wherever someone refuses to allow circumstance to dictate outcome. Wherever someone approaches challenge with preparation rather than hope, with process rather than prayer. The player is gone. The jersey is retired. The career is complete. But in gyms before dawn, in classrooms where difficult concepts are tackled rather than avoided, in workplaces where excellence is demanded without apology, in studios where creativity is approached with disciplined intensity, the Mamba mentality lives on. Not as tribute, but as tool. Not as past, but as present. Not as my legacy, but as others' possibility. Mamba forever. Time reveals truth in ways that moments cannot. Distance provides clarity that proximity obscures. Now, looking back across the full arc of a journey from that skinny kid shooting at a hoop in Italy to the global icon whose impact transcended the game itself, certain patterns emerged that weren't visible in the midst of the climb. My relationship with basketball was never simple. It wasn't just a game or even just a profession. It was a language through which I communicated with the world, a laboratory for testing the limits of human potential, a canvas for expressing truths that words alone couldn't capture. The court was where I felt most alive, most present, most fully myself. Not because scoring points brought happiness, though winning certainly did, but because the pursuit of mastery provided purpose. What drove me wasn't the desire to be better than others, though competition certainly fueled the fire. What drove me was the pursuit of a perfect expression of the game itself, the ideal form, the flawless execution, the complete embodiment of basketball in its pure state. This wasn't about ego, but about art, about approaching sport, not just as athletic competition, but as expression of human potential. The global impact of this approach wasn't something I fully comprehended during my playing days. I was too immersed in the immediate challenges, too focused on the next game, the next season, the next championship. But as my career progressed, especially during international competitions and global tours, I began to recognize something unexpected, the universal resonance of the mentality itself. I remember a trip to China in 2006. Stepping off the plane to thousands of fans chanting my name, holding signs in Mandarin with phrases like Mamba spirit and Kobe work ethic. These weren't just basketball fans. They were individuals who had found in my approach something that transcended sport, something that applied to their own dreams and challenges. In the Philippines, I witnessed courts painted with my image, pickup games where young players mimicked not just my fadeaway, but my intensity, my focus, my approach to the game. After a clinic in Manila, a 14-year-old boy approached me, trembling slightly. "I practice 4 hours every day before school," he said in careful English. "My friends say I'm crazy. They say I should sleep more." I knelt to meet his eyes. Are they working towards something worth sacrificing for? He shook his head. Then why would you expect them to understand your process? His face lit up with recognition. Not of me as celebrity, but of the shared understanding that excellence demands choices others won't comprehend. In that moment, I saw how the mentality crossed language, culture, economic circumstance, how it wasn't about basketball specifically, but about human potential more broadly. My impact on the next generation of players became increasingly apparent in my final seasons. I'd watch young talents like Devin Booker, Jason Tatum, Kyrie Irving, players who had grown up studying my game, and see not just technical elements they had incorporated, but philosophical approaches they had adopted. They weren't becoming copies, but developing their own interpretations, adding their unique capabilities to foundations they had partially built by studying my approach. After a game in Milwaukee during my farewell season, Giannis Antetokounmpo, still early in his career, approached me in the tunnel. Most young players ask for shoes, jerseys, photos. He wanted something different. How do you know which skills to develop next? He asked, his intensity palpable. How do you decide where to focus your improvement? Study your failures, not your successes, I told him. Your weaknesses are your roadmap. Your missed shots tell you what to practice. Your defensive lapses show you what to strengthen. Excellence isn't about emphasizing what you already do well. It's about eliminating what can be used against you. He nodded, eyes focused with that unmistakable hunger. Not taking notes physically, but mentally recording, processing, already translating the principle to his specific circumstances. In that moment, I saw curiosity as the true foundation. Not talent, not even work ethic, but the genuine desire to understand why certain approaches succeed while others fail. This wasn't just happening with NBA players. My advocacy for women's basketball stemmed from genuine appreciation for the game in its purest form. Diana Taurasi would text me at midnight about footwork details. Sue Bird would send film clips asking for defensive positioning insights. Their technical excellence and basketball intelligence matched or exceeded many of their male counterparts. Gianna's passion for the women's game deepened this appreciation. Watching UConn games together, analyzing WNBA matchups, attending women's college basketball, these became regular father-daughter activities. Her ambition wasn't to be the first woman in the NBA, but to elevate the WNBA to equal prominence. One morning, I found her in the gym at 5:30 a.m., already drenched in sweat, working on the same footwork drill for the 5th consecutive day. You've been here since when? I asked. 4:30, she replied without breaking rhythm. That's early even for me. What got you out of bed? She paused, wiped her forehead. Yesterday at practice, I couldn't get separation on my drives. Defense kept cutting me off, so I'm fixing it. In that moment, I witnessed the living embodiment of process over outcome. The understanding that results matter, but the path to those results matters more. That how you do anything is how you do everything. She hadn't inherited this approach genetically. She had developed it through observation, through application, through experiencing firsthand how methodical improvement yielded tangible results. The Mamba Sports Academy became the physical manifestation of this philosophy. Not just a training facility, but an educational institution where the mentality could be taught systematically. Watching Gianna's team, the Mambas implement these principles revealed how effectively they transferred across age, gender, and experience levels. During one practice, I diagrammed a complex defensive rotation that had worked for the championship Lakers teams. As the girl's eyes glazed over, Gianna raised her hand. Question? I asked. Yes, she said with that perfect mix of respect and teenage exasperation. Could we maybe just start with staying in front of our own player before we try to become the 2000 Lakers? The team erupted in laughter. I stood there, marker in hand, momentarily startled, then joined in. She was right, of course. My approach had been excessive for their development stage. In that moment of gentle correction, I witnessed detail orientation balanced with perspective, the understanding that excellence is cumulative, that seemingly minor elements compound into significant advantages, but that progression must follow a logical sequence. These years after retirement brought a personal contentment that had often eluded me during my playing career. The obsessive focus required to maintain basketball excellence had created a certain emotional narrowness. Now, with that singular pressure removed, I discovered a capacity for joy previously untapped. This isn't to suggest the competitive fire had dimmed. It had simply found new expressions. When Dear Basketball won the Academy Award, the satisfaction wasn't in the trophy itself, but in the successful application of the same principles that had produced basketball excellence, now expressed in a different domain. The discomfort as growth catalyst, the willingness to embrace rather than avoid difficulty, had meant entering a creative field as a novice, accepting the vulnerability of beginning again after mastering another arena. On January 26, 2020, Gianna and I were traveling to a basketball tournament at the Mamba Sports Academy. The helicopter trip was routine, a practical solution to Southern California traffic. Accompanying us were teammates from Gianna's team, parents, and a coach, A community united bishered passion for the game that had defined my life. The crash that claimed 9 lives that foggy morning in Calabasas represented an ending too abrupt, too cruel, too incomprehensible to process through conventional grief frameworks. A life of carefully controlled variables, of preparation overcoming circumstance, a will conquering limitation, concluded in a moment of absolute randomness, a cosmic cruelty beyond any rational understanding. The world seemed to stop turning. In a game between the Orlando Magic and Los Angeles Clippers, word spread through the arena during play. Players visibly broke down on the court, unable to continue. Doc Rivers, the Clippers coach known for his stoicism, wept openly during his pre-game interview. Fans gathered spontaneously outside Staples Center within hours. A growing sea of jerseys, flowers, basketballs, handwritten letters, strangers embracing, united in shared grief that transcended normal fan relationships. Across the globe, silence fell in arenas when the news broke. A Lakers game against the Celtics in Boston, the franchise I had battled most fiercely, saw Celtics fans chanting "Kobe, Kobe" through tears. The Grammy Awards, occurring that very evening in the arena I had called home for 2 decades, transformed into an impromptu memorial, with musicians who had never met me performing tributes between sobs. LeBron James, who had just passed me on the all-time scoring list the night before, was photographed in tears on the tarmac as the Lakers plane returned to Los Angeles. Shaquille O'Neal, my once rival and later reconciled championship partner, could barely speak through his grief on television. I lost my little brother. What made the grief so universal wasn't just the shock or the celebrity, but what I had come to represent beyond basketball. The crash didn't just claim a sports figure. It severed a living connection to a philosophy that had transcended the game itself. At the public memorial held at Staples Center, Vanessa delivered a eulogy that captured what the cameras had never fully seen. The devoted father behind the competitor, the playful spirit behind the intensity, the mentor who had found in Gianna a kindred basketball soul. God knew they couldn't be on this earth without each other, she said through tears. He had to bring them home to heaven together. Michael Jordan, my childhood idol and lifelong measuring stick, spoke with raw emotion rarely displayed by the typically guarded icon. When Kobe died, a piece of me died. In that moment, the most competitive player in basketball history abandoned all pretense to reveal the human connection beneath the athletic rivalry. What emerged in the aftermath was a clearer understanding of impact. The Mamba Mentality had transcended sports to become a philosophical approach to challenge, to excellence, to the everyday decisions that collectively define a life's direction. In the Philippines, artists created a basketball court painted with my image, a functioning art installation where the game continues as living tribute. Not just artistic memorial, but active continuation of the principles. Basketball as both means and end, as both entertainment and education, as both competition and communion. The 2020 Lakers championship, dedicated to my memory, provided a particularly poignant demonstration of this continuation. Anthony Davis, hitting a game-winning shot in the Western Conference Finals, shouted "Kobe" as teammates mobbed him. Players wore Black Mamba jerseys for crucial games, finding in shared grief a galvanizing energy. When they secured the title, veterans and rookies alike pointed skyward in acknowledgement not just of memory, but of continuing presence through principle. The WNBA named its All-Star MVP award after me, acknowledging not just basketball achievement but advocacy for the women's game. The annual Mamba Day celebrations on August 24th, 8/24ths, reflecting me jersey numbers, transformed from marketing event to cultural touchstone. A reminder not just of what was accomplished, but what remains possible through similar application of the underlying principles. A month after the crash, I watched from somewhere beyond as a high school basketball team in a small California town broke their huddle not with the traditional 1-2-3 team, but with 1-2-3 Mamba. The players weren't old enough to have witnessed my championship years. Yet the mentality had reached them, had provided a framework for their own aspirations. Legacy isn't what you leave behind when you're gone. It's what you build while you're here. It's the invisible architecture that remains standing long after the physical form has vanished. It's the principles that outlive the person, the philosophy that transcends the philosopher, the impact that ripples outward in ever-widening circles. In this sense, immortality comes not through remembrance, but through continuation. The Mamba mentality lives wherever someone refuses the easy path in favor of the right one. Wherever someone pushes beyond comfortable competence toward genuine mastery. Wherever someone embraces rather than avoids the difficult path precisely because of the growth it promises. The player is gone. The jersey is retired. The career is complete. But the mentality, the approach to challenge, to growth, to excellence, that continues. Mamba forever.